All right, we are live. Welcome to the Praxian Roundtable on Popular Liberty. And oh shoot, there we go. That's that. Sorry, I had myself playing in the background so I could see the comments. Oopsie. Alrighty. Anyway, so I just went ahead and sent out the link, and I think we're ready to go. And so big news tonight, guys. We have a new donation page with WinRed, and so we are now able to officially take money for MisesGOP to start spreading the anti-tax and getting libertarians elected as Republicans to local elections. And
what is WinRed?
WinRed is a fundraising platform for the Republican Party. That's okay. It's basic. It's not like quite official, but it's like semi-official. It's like you have to be a Republican to use it, but it's basically Antidote for Antidote's like more kind of general for anything, but WinRed specifically for Republican political fundraising. And so like there's very little chance of us getting canceled from there because we're not going to be fighting with anybody.
Yeah, they must have quite an infrastructure then.
Oh yeah, it's a nice website, very very nice. And so but yeah, so like that's like going to be the kind of the backdrop of this is where this conversation where we want to start taking power in order to start helping Abbott be a much better Abbott and DeSantis to continue being awesome. Yeah, because like these guys, these big leaders, what they really need is backup. They need reinforcements. If they have local executives and local, town councils backing them up at every turn, and just being in lockstep with them, that's like the perfect world for them.
And just knowing, I suppose, if that were the case, just knowing that that's there gives them some more balls, really, to work with, if that makes sense.
Yep, and it also gives them a little bit of competition. That if they start slacking a little bit, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of really really good mayors right there who'd be happy to take up the mantle, and and if they're all working in lockstep, then they're all working together, and that's not to your best. It's in your best interest to not screw with that.
Yeah,
and. So yeah, so that's the big news out of today is that we can finally fundraise after all this time of jumping through hoops, paperwork, which are like my Achilles heel, and we finally got it all done. We're finally approved, finally online. And
so are you the head of MisesGOP?
I am.
Are you the Michael Heiss of MisesGOP? Is that how we can look at it?
Better.
Well, but I mean, as far as thinking of.
But yeah. Pretty much.
Got it. Okay.
So basically, I can't run because I'm the super PAC leader, but I'm going to be finding everybody else who can because unfortunately that's against the law. I can't fund myself. That's against the law. But I would run, but I can't. But I will have no shortage. I'm sure I will have no shortage of committed libertarians who are ready to start pushing the anti-tax through and starting to. Actually take power and start giving, reinforcements, or maybe a sharp edge behind the Republicans to make sure that they start behaving the way they really need to with the proper testicular fortitude.
So it's a way to get libertarians who want to actually do something with power that's a better avenue to get them elected and to actually be legitimate than the LP itself. And then also it can push the Republican Party in a better direction, less old school kind of country club types that are around here in Texas, as we've seen. So it's kind of a
it's going to take the Republican Party in a substantially younger, substantially more energetic, and substantially less gay, substantially less gay direction where we're going to be actually using power to kind of curb the state, because let's face it, only power can control power. And it really helps, these kind of linguini-spined Republicans to know that they have not only quite a lot of reinforcements back where they come from in their hometowns and their districts, but they actually have quite a lot of competition there too. So if they fuck up, don't fuck up. That's going to be bad for them. It's a good incentive to have reinforcements. Also, that a kind of a knife in the back, not like a stab in the back, but there's a point right there, and you feel it, and it's uncomfortable. So you better stay ahead of it.
Would we be helping? Look at that! I already said we. Would we be helping people like Don Huffines?
Oh yeah, I love Huffines, and I would probably moral support, but certainly he'd be the guy I would we would be endorsing. But at a governor level race, that's not something we are up to yet, merely because we have substantially higher priorities.
Sure.
Namely getting our own guys elected first, and if we were to get a Huffines or even an Allen West in there, that would be just absolutely excellent. As a replacement for Abbott.
Mm-hmm.
And Abbott, he seems a little old. He's slow.
Yeah.
He's good, but he's slow.
Yeah.
And it really keeps kind of gnawing at me that Florida is doing better than Texas. And of course, I am a guy from Florida, but at the same time, Texas, really is like Texas. It's like I feel like the Republican Party there is kind of lounging and sitting on, resting on its laurels, and they're not fighting quite the way they should.
Yeah, I agree. Though Bishop always says Texas, and I say we, he doesn't mean us in particular, but we kind of just have this old, we're the Lone Star State, we're our own thing, we're rebels, and it just kind of, we have that about us, and we might not actually be living it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say Texas its name has become synonymous with Republican decline and conservative decline, and whereas like Florida is like Republican ascendancy.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It's interesting because I was having some conversations last weekend with some older members in my family, and we were talking about the Constitution, right? And how if only they would get back to the Constitution. And listen, these are people who came here as refugees too. But it's something that people believe in, right? The idea of the Constitution, I think in many respects, has restrained whatever American right there is in this country for basically the entire existence of the document. And now you're kind of seeing people realizing that, they're not going to abide by this thing. They're not even going to pretend to abide by this thing anymore. And I wonder, I'm an outsider. I'm not a Texan by any stretch of the imagination, although let's see what the future holds. But I wonder if some of that isn't also in effect in Texas, right? And it's this degree to which the average person believes that the Constitution is what's keeping the box in place, like keeping the fencing in order, right? And so everybody can kind of go out to pasture, as the case may be.
Oh yeah, I think that's exactly the case, because remember that libertarians, although they like to pretend they're not right-wing, temperamentally they're very right-wing, and that they have a strong sense of these are our principles and we do not violate them. And the right generally, particularly constitutionalists, has the same exact thing where these are our principles, these are what we believe, and and if they have to be a straitjacket on us, then that's fine. And they have that exact same temperament as the right-wingers. And that's because they pretty much are right-wingers. They have that near zero time preference for power compared to just the regular right, who just has a low time preference. So they're like kind of an extreme version, which is of the right, which is exactly what the left calls us. So
right.
Actually, I think the left has a decent point by calling libertarians, far right, because that's our time preference for power. So, and that's
I don't think they think that. They're not thinking in terms of time preference.
They're thinking instinctively.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I think left and right can be used. Right, these words can be used in many different ways. Sorry to get all philosopher, but it's what I do. Words can be used in many different ways, and left and right are kind of these like ephemeral words that have been used for the past 100 or something years ago. And so I've done my best to try and figure out what people mean when they say those things. I think certainly you can take, somebody like a Yarvin says order, chaos. Okay, well, actually then right equals order, left equals chaos. That's actually a different lens than what I think we're talking about, which is the way I tend to use left and right, which is a contextual term that kind of maps out biological temperamental attributes of people and environmental attributes of people too. But basically your temperament in effect becomes your politics. And people tend to look at politics as the first point of the causality instead of it being the last point of the point of the causal chain.
It's the effect.
Yeah.
It's the effect, not the cause. And yeah, I think with like order and chaos, like that is actually predictive based on your temperament to which one you're actually going to prefer. Do you want the more like with chaos, if you have a high time preference for power, you're going to end up causing a lot of damage, causing a lot of constriction of the hierarchy and start collapsing that down into a lot more equality. So you're actually going to get a more egalitarian society based on your own time preference for power, and of course that is very interrelated and determined by your personality types and your personality preferences. And same thing with the right, where they're your lower time preference because you're consuming quite a lot less of society's wealth in the form of predation, and that way you're actually there leaves more for everyone else. That leaves more for spontaneous order, and that's going to end up increasing your amount of hierarchy. That's going to increase the amount of order.
And because people have this reaction to left and right in a different frame, which is what was called liberal and conservative, that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of libertarians will, not even naturally, but they're trained to react against the left and right frame, because for so long, and certainly you can say the case from when 50 years ago, when the LP started, or however many years ago it was libertarians in Murray Rothbard's basement or living room, as the case may be. It was the fact that it was far more homogenous what the political opposition looked like. We don't operate in that same time frame, but we still see the same delineation of left and right. And certainly it can't be denied that there is both a left and a right component to libertarianism. It's basically, it really boils down to either you haven't spent that much time with the ideas, which is totally fair, and I think is something we should talk about, because there's a little bit to which sometimes when you're interacting with a profile on Twitter, it's a 20-year-old who's 6 months in. Yeah. And I certainly remember being 6 months in when I was 20 years old and being really annoyed at people being like, hey man, I'm still trying to figure this stuff out. But to the point is, you can recognize both, but what happens in effect is that the leftists don't like to point out that there's any validity to a right sort of perspective in these broad strokes that we're painting with, and so they deny the existence of the right, and so therefore I'm just a libertarian. I'm not right in any respect.
Yeah. Buck, did you want to comment on that?
I'll be nice. Yeah. There are some people within LP circles that look at politics through an outdated lens, and just outdated as in like 2012 or 2008, and they'll interchange the right and the Republican Party.
Oh yeah.
And then they'll say something about Republicans or right wingers when they truly mean like just the hodgepodge of elites in the establishment, which could go either way. I mean, there's not a lot of difference between George Bush and Hillary Clinton. There is a lot of difference between Kamala Harris and Ron DeSantis, but they see it all as kind of a homogenous blob of elites, and then also lump in all of the voters. And it can be frustrating sometimes to hear and see these things go on when you just want to shake the person, and it's like, hold on, but to each their own. But those are some of the common things that I see. And, we don't lump in the LP with Michael Badnarik or what's the guy that ran in 2008 from Georgia, Bob Barr. So, there's been a lot of change in political shifting over the last 5 years, to say the least. And so part of the challenge of me doing my show is keep getting people up to date on some of those changes.
I think so. Exactly. Yeah. I think that this is something that basically all sides play. It's a game that all sides play. That, hey, the right wing, the right and the left and the libertarians, they each, that if they really want to attack the other side, what they do is they don't hold up the extremists, they hold up the centrists. Yeah. And they go after the centrists, and because usually, and that's why I say, we really should say, okay, the right is like your rightmost third, your left is your leftmost third, and your center, which obviously exists, is like your center third. And that's really what we should be referring to. We don't, but just because people just want to be partisan and they want to see rah rah my team, and it's like, okay, that's fun, but I recognize we probably shouldn't do that. But that is in fact what usually happens. That when we say that there really isn't much difference between George Bush and Hillary Clinton. Yeah, they're both centrists, of course. They're both, and from my point, they're both left of center. But I'm sure some people would disagree with me on that.
They shouldn't disagree with you on that. You're exactly right. They're just both part of the oligarchy.
Pretty much. Howdy, Jose.
What up, Jose Gallison?
Jose in the chat. And
Andrew, will you speak to something you told me personally? And this is not a secret or anything. I keep thinking about it, that local elections, meaning city council, mayor, there's rarely a political party affiliation, at least in my area. And I don't even believe when I lived in Austin, there was one there. Everyone kind of knows, like, the mayor of Austin's a Democrat, right?
Yeah.
The mayor of this town's leans Republican. But you said to me, I think it should be the law that you have to have a party affiliation, because when you don't, that's how kind of lefties sneak into towns like mine now, Lockhart, because they don't have to have that D next to their name to scare.
That's exactly how that happens. Yeah, I mean, basically, you're pretending that these, local governance is not a partisan issue. Like, of course, it's a partisan issue, and they have the same thing with a lot of school districts, where they say that school district elections, it should not be partisan what we're teaching our kids, and obviously it is.
Right.
It's like, this is how we got so many leftists in the Texas and Florida school curriculum, right, doing with drag queen story time and that all this masking bullshit, is because we have a whole bunch of in critical race theory. This is because we can't, you're not giving the voters the information that they want. Whereas, if you had to go through a national primary system, that's a filtration mechanism. That's how you filter out all the bad candidates. And, but by taking that away from the voters, it's like you're literally making the voters fly in blind. So, of course, they have no idea, who they're voting for. And, when they go, and because of that, it's really easy for if you even have a campaign website, you just put some fluff material on there that just sounds good. And, it's very generic. You can't tell what's what at all. And of course, then that's just because, there's no incentive. You're not trying to go to a base or anything. And so people just have no idea who they're voting for. And that's how you end up getting leftists in there. And
walk into a room, and at least I'm trying to think, in Illinois, I don't think they're on the ballot as far as party registration, and there's 6 names on there. And so how many people are just going to mark the first one, or I like that name, this one's close to mine? There's a funny point, because I like using the term the cult of American democracy, because I don't use cult in a pejorative sense. I think it's applicable to what we see. In the sense that there could be a particular cult of an ancient Greek god, right? The Greek Zeus of the marketplace. But to the degree for local elections, it's supposed to be we don't want parties in our system. And there's this sense of which, we can't have parties at the local level because it's supposed to be about what you're actually doing. But in effect, I think what you pointed out was very good there, which was, in effect, it lets the more ideological people actually get into positions of power because they don't have to answer to anything. Or even worse, in some instances, your standard potential drone for whatever talking points are going to be passed down. Because, you think that, I'm going to enter the party machine because this is my civic duty. I feel like I need a sense of belonging. And so I'm just looking for something to say. And I think in both cases, if you have the sorting mechanism of a party on the person's identifier, at least who they voted for last, it at least lets the person voting sort.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a filtration mechanism. You're taking away the people's ability to actually have information about who they're voting for. And, it's I always say the best kind of system is a price system, because it's actually a number and you can calculate with it. You can use it to do math. And, that's something that's actually going to help right wingers win quite a lot more over left wingers, is that hey, we have a lower time preference for power. That's going to cost quite a lot less. And, lowest price in the market usually wins. So if you had some way, if you had some way of accurately pricing, okay, this candidate is going to cost X, that candidate is going to cost Y, and you can compare the two, the lower usually wins. And what you see in, elections a lot of times is, I think you actually just mentioned it, is that the people will generally choose the name at the top. And the reason is because they're usually sorted in alphabetical order. And so the one at the top just wins for that reason. And they actually get like an extra 20% bump.
Yeah, and if people want to quibble, right, you could say, well, the person who isn't going to inform themselves but still wants to vote for every position is more likely to choose the person at the top, because you might say, well, I didn't vote. I didn't vote, and I don't vote in those types of things if you're somebody who votes, because there's 16 names and I don't know who they are, right? Do I keep or get rid of these judges? Do I sit there for the 3 minutes it says it takes to say no to all of them just for the principle of the matter, right? Because, and one thing that I think is interesting, and we touched upon a few things before, but as it relates to the LP in particular, there is a sense in which 5 years ago, before 2016, certainly, the case could be made for it was better made for an outsider, kind of like, hey, we're trying to hold the system accountable. But there hasn't been any meaningful change as a metric of that. And I don't, as Dave Smith says, when the government goes totalitarian, your tactics have to change. Your beliefs, your principles don't have to change, but certainly your tactics do. And that's where this, and to the point is, everybody agrees that, or anybody who agrees with the Misesian worldview would also agree that decentralization is preferable, because it attempts to disperse power and prevents it from getting, too nestled in one place. And so therefore, any strategy that allows for localism and decentralization should be embraced.
Absolutely.
It's only if you want to get caught up in an identity within your own political party, in this particular instance, we might point a finger at the LP, that we would get stuck on any sort of roadblocks as far as there being an alignment here. And this relates back to DeSantis, because the argument will inevitably happen, and is happening currently. Who should run against DeSantis on a Libertarian Party ticket, and is that necessary? And I have said, as a registered member of the LP, by the way, I've paid my dues. I've said I don't think that's a good idea. Now, I'm not in Florida, so it's not necessarily my decision, but just from a strategic perspective, this is before I even started hearing of your work, Andrew. Like even before I learned the name archotropism, it just didn't make sense from a tactical perspective in that regard, and it doesn't. And so why is that something contentious? Well, because I have my identity hung up in this idea, and it has to happen exactly the way that I want. Before I was ever a libertarian, I was a skeptic, and I learned about skeptical ways of thinking, which is putting doubt first. And we always try to operate from a position of knowledge. And that would, and so it used to be in like college days, I would mix it up with the objectivists, right? Because they really don't like to talk about any kind of subjectivity. But now there's
a party, the objectivists and the skeptics. What a fun bunch.
I mean, I'd like to think I'm a delight, but it kind of, you have to be ready for the conversation.
I bet they're people.
But the point is kind of just to point out the folly of, or not even the folly, but just to recognize the times as they are. And I think if you have any authenticity as a creator, or as somebody who's attempting to bend reality, as I've been referring to it lately, is you have to recognize that times have changed. I said this when Donald Trump was elected, and I've been doing everything that I thought I knew about politics. I threw out the window and started over. And then I did the same exact process in 2020 when Governor Pritzker here in Illinois came on TV and said, we're closing everything down for 2 weeks. Right? If you didn't, that's okay. But just recognize that a lot of us have been. And so, and once you start that pattern recognition software in your brain, looking for new things, you suddenly see new and better opportunities.
Yeah, I think so. And I just want to, make a note that, I've had people from the Mises Caucus in Florida reach out to me and say that actually we're not planning on running anybody against DeSantis, and so hold off on lobbying against us. I'm like, all right, okay. And so apparently the Mises Caucus, I'm not sure if they're in control of Florida now, though, so that might be a problem.
For the most part, they are, yeah.
But yeah, I haven't heard one way or another if they're completely in charge, but if they should, if they are, good for them. And hey, if they're not planning on running anybody against DeSantis, then good for them. So that would be catastrophic for their for whatever messaging campaign they wanted to do. That just makes you look like an asshole. And
leftists.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you're like playing into every stereotype of the LP, and like all of the worst ones.
So let's bring up the objection, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
But don't you understand? It's just as bad to tell businesses they can't allow for a passport. I don't know what I'm supposed to say.
Yeah, vaccine passport.
Okay, cool. So I can say that. Yeah, you're not supposed to allow for the vaccine passport, right? It's just as bad to stop a business from doing that in response to what the federal government did than it is to create the conditions for a vaccine passport. And anybody who wants to challenge me on that, I dare you. I dare you to challenge me to any kind of debate where you can justify that position when it is so clearly the case that the federal government fired first.
Yeah,
the causality exists. Even deontological principles have to be applied. Otherwise, there is no meaning. That's the whole concept behind Praxis, by the way, is about applying ideas. And without applying ideas, again, they have no meaning. They have no consequence, literally. And so if you even applying the strictures of the non-aggression principle, you can still make for the same case. So that's a challenge. I know nobody here is going to disagree with that, but I felt it's worthwhile to raise the objection.
Of course, and that's an easy, having this archotropism framework, it's a very easy one to debunk. And just from a praxeological standpoint, I can say that, okay, well, if you have your 4 quadrants, and you can easily say, okay, all right, we're libertarians, we want the bottom quadrant, so that's the target, and we're going to say the top quadrant is that's the problem, and so and then they make no distinction between left and right, and that's where they get that wrong. Can y'all hear me?
Yep. Oh, we got you.
I just bought my mic accidentally, but yeah, so they make no distinction there. The problem with that is basically this framework of archotropism, where what you end up with is chaos ends up being fuel for the state. So in order to power grab. So if you think the top quadrant is the problem, well, then the left quadrant is fuel for the top quadrant. Therefore, the left quadrant has to be a problem, and for you. So therefore, anytime you have the federal government come in and try to exert chaos, try to make authoritarian chaos, that's that top left quadrant. Mm-hmm. That's they're trying to enforce chaos on everybody. What they just did is made a good situation or a good environment for them to continue power grabbing. And this is what ended up happening here is that DeSantis decided to use this as a time to power grab to the right. So the reason that's actually the correct way of doing it, instead of what the libertarians would usually like to say, well, no, actually you just need to move down the quadrant. You want to move down first, and then you can go either way. It doesn't matter. The reason that's incorrect is, remember, this is all based on praxeological demand. So so if you understand that chaos demands order, and that's usually done through power, then what you need to do first is squelch the chaos. Kill the demand. And that's only done by restoring order forcibly. At that point, you relax. This is something Yarvin has talked about, that the correct way of getting towards liberty is always move right first by authority. If you have to do it by authoritarian means, then do it by authoritarian means. If you don't have to do it that way, don't do it that way. But if you have chaos, it needs to get put down first, because that's demand for statecraft. Chaos is always demand for further statecraft. So in order to actually move towards liberty, which is that bottom right quadrant, you need to actually move to the right first, then restore order, because now that there's no longer chaos and we have order, now we can start moving towards the spontaneous order, which is the bottom right quadrant. But that starts with that's because of demand. If as long as there's chaos, there is demand for statecraft, which is that higher quadrant. So anytime you're saying, hey, there's no difference between left and right, well, actually, yes, one of those is fuel for the top half. The other is not. The other kills the demand for it. So your natural incentives are, basically, if you can draw some arrows here in your head, you have an arrow going from the bottom left quadrant up to the top left quadrant and to the top right quadrant. And if you have the top left quadrant, basically there's an arrow going, directly right to the rightward quadrant. Whereas like if you have the rightward quadrant, there's an arrow going down to the to the bottom right quadrant, and there's no arrow from the right quadrant because that's where you really want to go. But because that's the demand circuit.
And explain then, there's no way to get from the top left quadrant to the bottom right quadrant. But libertarians kind of pretend that if we just stick with these principles, we'll end up there. But we keep getting further up to that left one.
And that's just impossible because of supply and demand. Again, chaos is always demand for statecraft. So you have to move rightward first to kill the demand and then move down, towards spontaneous order, which is what we call liberty.
And it seems like people instinctively, even if they don't get into this kind of type of discussion using these examples, they must instinctively feel this because no one's leaving Florida to go to California. It's always the opposite. So there's some type of instinct that people have going, I can't break down why DeSantis should rule this way or why I think this is this, but I'm going there.
And this is why I say that, the thin libertarian praxeology is incomplete. And if you just completed the picture with archotropism, you would see exactly why, it actually is proper to move to, if you're in the top authoritarian left quadrant, which is where we really don't want to be, move rightward first, and that restores order. Why is this, the actual proper order? Why is what he did actually proper? Well, but for that, because he basically put it back to the way it had been previously, to where pre-COVID, no one was asking you for, let me see your medical records. That's what that was what the actual spontaneous order looked like. It wasn't like 3 or 4 days ago, when we're still under still under the COVID regime. Order is what the pre-COVID regime would look like. Basically.
Lest we get too far ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
What is it that you, because I'm curious, because I don't know that I have a good answer other than I think, what is it? Is it Gadssad's parasitic ostrich syndrome? Does that apply? I'm not really sure.
I'm not sure what that is. You're right.
But basically, what is it about people that they have this tendency to bury their heads in the sand? To the situation at hand, because you've made this argument about thin libertarianism, about that it's incomplete, and I would only say in response, of course, because thin libertarianism was designed to be incomplete. The whole idea was we can have these opposing, right, different from divergent, mind you, but opposing cultural attitudes, and we can still have them operate within the same legal framework, and that solution is thin libertarianism. Right, and thin libertarianism for the outsider is only isn't really a matter that needs to be worried about, but it was opposed from thick libertarianism, which was we have to have libertarianism with a bunch of cultural attitudes, and as the case may be, these cultural attitudes could be generally considered more left or more liberal in their nature, right? So I would say thin libertarianism was always meant to be incomplete, and perhaps a better way of putting it is that we just that it was a deal made that nobody wanted to take. That's the reality of it. Going back to that point I made about the Constitution and how people believe that at that instinctual level, and I think that's the proper term to use, people believe at that instinctual level that the Constitution is actually what's keeping this system in order, not people who want order keeping this system in order. And I think that shift in consciousness is something that we're witnessing right now, and certainly one that I felt, right? If you look at the landscape, it's a lot harder if you want to be honest with yourself, and you see this coming tyranny as a problem, right? If you see this creation of a new underclass as a problem, it's very difficult for me to not recognize the fact that the degree to which it is left in nature, right? It is Marx in nature. It's chaotic in nature, as the case may be. Yeah. And there was a very good point made recently about that. Again, I kind of wish somebody was here to speak to this, but the idea that tyranny is itself a maximum, is maximal order, when by its nature, the whole idea of a tyrant in any place, I can use Hegel for this, right? And Hegel's not somebody that I would use for a lot, but his whole dialectic is originally built on the idea of the king going against the will of the king, countermanding the will of God. And that was created tyranny. And that created two opposing forces that needed to be overcome. Whose will reigns, right? Whose will reigns? Is it the king, or is it God's, or the gods, as the case may be?
Mm-hmm. Let me take your first point about it being designed to be incomplete. What I usually say is that its praxeology is incomplete. So
I think that's a different argument, but I would agree with you.
If I'm being specific, I would say its praxeology is incomplete, or it's based on an incomplete praxeology. And and this is why it has really obvious errors where it doesn't work. And this is why Hoppe's explanations are actually all correct about libertarianism properly being a right-wing ideology and being incompatible with left-wing ideology. But whereas Hoppe and getting libertarianism right is about a 27,000 word essay. He takes like 27,000 words to explain it. I can do it, with the archotropism framework in like a paragraph. And that's because, I have the finished praxeology, whereas he really has to put in a whole lot of extra work in order to get the correct result. But his result is correct. And his explanations are in fact correct, because a lot of these things they're not compatible with a libertarian goals. And I think that's another issue I would say with Thin Liberty, is that if you have to ask yourself, what's the goal of this thing? Why is this thing created? It doesn't just exist in a vacuum for no reason. It exists so you can kind of define a praxis, define ways of actually making it reality, and defines good conduct, good, et cetera, et cetera. And if you are dealing with an incomplete praxeology, you're going to get wrong answers. And that's why libertarianism has to be a thick libertarianism, so that one, you can get a complete praxeology and understand why certain things don't work. And even though they should theoretically be compatible with liberty, but in reality they're not. And then you need to have a conversation about, well, what do we do about that? And I think Hoppe has a lot to say about that. And howdy to Matt from Kingpilled in the chat. And if only he were here and not driving. And so he says that thin libertarianism was intended to be incomplete, but the existing libertarian zeitgeist hasn't accepted that. And that's the crux of the conflict right now. And, Joshua and Mark Metz also wanted to give Buck a compliment on his fresh buzz cut, because he is looking fine.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, and let's add on to the thin thick position, because as you just said, you do claim that libertarianism needs to be thick. You now have the thins, as it were, trying to rejoin with the thicks, as the case may be, and that it involves LP organizing.
Kind of. I would say they're actually trying to, really put I forget who said it the other day. I think it was. I'm getting some echo.
Are we back?
I think we're good. I was getting some weird echo.
I was getting ready to start beatboxing.
All right, we're good. But I think the reason we were. Ace said the other day that people who are trying to argue for a thick version, they're just mad that that like a triangle block doesn't fit in a square hole. I'm like, did you ever question the fact that it's a square hole and a triangle block? It's like, no shit, this is the problem. It's like we should don't you think you should ask yourself, why is it a square hole and why are we a triangle block? Like, obviously this doesn't fit. So, like, what's the problem? It should be really obvious to you from just saying that okay, there's a problem here, and this doesn't. Reality is square, and we're a triangle. So what went wrong? And that should immediately just tell you something went wrong, and you need to backtrack and figure out where you went wrong in your logic. And
I think that's asking people. I think that's asking a lot of people. Or not even unfortunately. I think that's asking too much of people. And I don't, and not all people, mind you. This is why the elites need to be held accountable in all instances. But I do think it's a lot to ask people to really question the entirety of what they've come to believe. Because if everything that I believe can be questioned, what does that say about me as a person, what I've done, and what my future is? It's a terrifying this actually speaks very well to the conception of order and chaos in this instance, right? Where it's if you have the libertarian who would still not see, who would say in this as the case may be, that it is wrong for DeSantis and Abbott to ban vaccine passports in the state. The libertarian who would say that because they're appealing to some notion of consistency that literally does nothing. That person is unwilling to reflect and to re-examine their initial conditions, right? And if we're going to say, and if you're not willing to do that, that's fine, but you better be right. But there is even if you're wrong, there is a sense in which you feeling right is more important than actually being right in many instances. And it's asking people a lot to again just to kind of make the point.
Yeah, I agree, and I think as a part of our praxis, I think I've modified my behavior a little bit recently to try to be a little bit more, a little bit less harshly critical of of these thin libs who I think are very well intentioned and really are trying to seek truth and all that. If you're coming in trying to be an asshole, I'm gonna block you or make fun of you. So, but if you're coming in well-intentioned, okay, I will treat you pretty fairly. And I think
our early interactions were more combative than friendly.
Yeah, I've had to modify my behavior. I figured, okay, this is not what actually has to get the result. And what's important is that I actually have to get the result. And you don't do that by being combative with people. You have to do it by, or too harshly. Sometimes you have to be critical because this thing is incorrect and wrong because it is incomplete. And it is it's not like wrong. It's right as far as it goes. It just doesn't go nearly far enough. And that's another thing I've mentioned lately, that you can tell how good a libertarian is by their familiarity with Hoppe. And the and the more familiar they are with Hoppe, the more they are really in the know. Like I can really reach those people really easily. Like Jared from End Democracy, I don't think I've ever had conflict with him, except for there was one time where he beat me in a Twitter poll for who hates the left more. So. But for that, I don't think I've ever had any conflict with him. But he won, unfortunately. But I'll have to up my game. But yeah, I'm sorry, I missed your point. Can you summarize it in one or two sentences?
Which point? I made a lot.
Yeah.
I think I made a brief point most recently just about how our early interactions weren't necessarily we're not necessarily well, I wasn't quite sure you were right about certain things, and I still don't think you're right about certain things necessarily, but in the main we're heading in the same direction. And it was the archetype of it was okay, who's this guy, what's he saying, why this all seems like kind of whatever. Dig in. I was making a point more to when you approach things in the right frame of mind, you can come to an understanding. But if you're trying to cling to the idea of truth, if you're trying to cling to the idea of truth and your truth, right, or whatever the truth or your truth, people can take exception with my words, I don't really care. If you're trying to cling to the idea of truth, it's very hard to reconsider the position that got you to where you are, even if it's wrong.
I remember where I was responding to now that thank you for reminding me. Basically, talking about these other LP types who are trying to basically, they're trying to hold thin libertarianism up as the whole thing and let that be the end all be all. And I think that's going to have a flawed praxis, and that's going to be a problem. That's not going to work. And
sorry to cut you off, but as the case may be, also I think the original people who put thin libertarianism forth, right, like who was it, like Lou Rockwell, I know was a proponent for it, as far as I recall, in different Mises industry, in that they would put it forth. They of course again just knew it was an incomplete system, so perhaps we might say that there are people who have picked up an incomplete system and think that it's the totality, right? It's like just having the book of Job for the Bible.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what has actually happened here, is that because if you look at even like Lou Rockwell and Jeff Deist, they may say, okay, this is what, libertarian is, but in practice, they're all thick libertarians and they're all very far to the right.
Yes.
And, the Mises Institute, compliments to them. They're like the one organization that might actually end up disproving Conquest's second law.
Well, they're explicitly right wing, though.
Are they?
Oh,
I didn't know that.
Under the order, certainly under the order chaos framework, I would agree with Buck that I think that probably is more to what Konkin was speaking on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, because Austrian economics per se is value free, right?
Yes.
But it's also descriptive of the world, and it brings order to chaos by its very nature.
Yes.
Well, but even right there, if you're trying to describe value, it's tough not to describe, okay, well, here's this other kind of predation value that is right there. And it's like you can't describe the whole world without, that's only 2/3 of it. Because let's face it, on a normal year that's not COVID, predation is like 1/3 of the economy, and we really should try to understand why that value is there and what's working right there, and why does this thing exist? How does it grow, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this would have been a perfect thing for chapter in Anatomy of the State, but it's just not there. And so if you actually go through and use Mises's method, which is why I say, this is why I've got some criticism for calling the super PAC Mises GOP, because aren't you just copying the LP Mises caucus? And I said, well, actually, they're pretty close to Rothbard, and that, which by the way is a compliment. It's like I'm not trying to be mean to them, but their politics are substantially closer to Rothbard than they are to Mises, and my method is basically verbatim Mises. I'm using Praxeology to define, what I feel is missing from thin libertarianism, and then making basically a hierarchy of values and saying, okay, we're going to do these values first. That's basically Mises's law of diminishing marginal utility. That's exactly how I did. This is exactly how I did that with subjective value too, and thrown in there. My method is, this is. As a Praxian, it's like I'm taken from like either Praxis or Praxeology. My method is far more close to Mises. I far more deserve the name Mises GOP than the LP Mises caucus does. But I'm sure they all have well intentions, and I think it's a good name. But I don't if they're gonna criticize me for that. This is actually where, I've actually kind of done the hard work of figuring out the rest of what the picture should be and trying to adapt accordingly. And, and I feel like this is, actually what Mises did, because he was actually a little bit more of a minarchist, and because he was, trying to, he understood this in kind of instinct. He never quite went into it, but he understood it instinctively that, okay, this thing is here and it has its own system to it. I'm still trying to figure out this other production system right now, because that just hasn't been all done yet. But for now, I'm going to leave the political praxis at X, Y, and Z, which was basically minarchy or a night watchman state.
Well, and the world of Mises was the world that came out of the state as having existed always, right? Like there was never any point at which you were to question the state. That's what I was actually, it's a perfect segue, because I wanted to put this idea out, because it's just spinning a little bit what you were saying, which is, if you look at the scope of human history, and let me pause there, because I also thought of another point when you were talking about the other Mises caucus, as the case may be, which is there is perhaps a degree to which Mises is a lot like Socrates, in that we really only know Socrates through Plato, and there are many people who only know Mises through Rothbard.
Yeah,
that's just an interesting frame. Yeah. But if we look at the totality of history, to the specifics of the state wasn't questioned until the rise of the merchant class. Basically, until somebody had enough money to say, "Hey, why do you have all this stuff? Why do you have?" And the state in the in the monarchical sense. Why do you have all this land? Why do you have all this power in society? Why can't I have more? And so the degree to which a state would exist is a very modern and very novel idea. You can find some iterations of it throughout history, but certainly it would be more about removing yourself from a society and or you might say a natural ordering to things, which is kind of the anarchism is a relationship, not a destination, as some would put out, as somebody like Malice would put out there. Mm-hmm. You might find like some ordering of things or certain instances where societies are more anarchic, but in practice, And in the main, the world was a world of states. But then we suddenly discovered this field of economics through praxeology, through these counterintuitive means that you can actually maximize things, can get richer than they ever could before. And so faced with that information, it might make sense to explore the possibility of things in a world where there was no zero sum. What I think the archotropism framework does very well is delineate the fact that no, there is a degree to which society is zero sum. Not all of society, but enough of society, and that necessitates a different strategy as a result, right? Like game theory would require that. If I'm operating in a positive sum and like in my particular niche of the economy, right? It can be competitive at times, but then sometimes you got to split business with another supplier. And you don't like to do it, but you do it because overall it adds to your bottom line. That's ultimately positive sum for all people involved. It's not the case that I got to go out and kill my competition, literally speaking, so that I can be the only one to sell them the product that I do. But I think what the archotropism framework does very well, and recent history has shown the fact that there are things in life that will come out to be zero sum.
Yeah, and it's just by nature of of how it maximizes value. And it's going to always have to be zero sum because that's the way you would maximize an aggressive order that doesn't give a rat's ass about consent. And there's no good way around it. And because this value is always conserved, it's not going away. I mean, you can't get rid of all wealth, because any sort of wealth it can be transformed into power. And if you get rid of all wealth, I mean, you're getting rid of all humans. You can't. So there's no way to get rid of power functionally. And you can get rid of it in one case, but all that does is transfer the value elsewhere. And you can just actually destroy value, you destroy actual power, and the value remains the same. It just moves. And that's all it does. And there's no destroying it. There's no creating it. And so this is why, and it makes sense because this is what we've had for 200,000 years. So it better be, like really, really durable. And this is something that's hardwired into humanity because this is how we survived, the Great Ice Age. And go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So when I would argue with my brother years ago, we argue less now kind of by design about the efficacy for Austrian free market economics and why it's better than like the Keynesian model and all this stuff. One inevitable argument that would be raised is, well, so why? So if it's so much better, why was it the case? Why is it the case that everybody, if it was a choice between Keynes and Mises, right? If there was a committee meeting that people voted on in this theoretical we're creating that said, hey guys, are we going Mises or are we going Keynes? Keynes is not going to last more than 50 years, but Mises is going to go on forever. Why is it the case that the Keynesian school, as the case may be, and I think that this audience would be familiar at least enough to recognize, why is it that the Keynesian school would win out? Well, the archotropic framework actually answers this question. This was a thought I had recently, which is namely, and I even said this as the reason, well, because that benefited the people in power.
Yeah.
And it was the thing that, you kind of intuit naturally within the case of the argument, but what the framework does is allow for more people to, the framework gives you a degree to which people play. And I've created some different frameworks that offer on a more philosophical basis, but they, as far as I can tell, they completely cohere.
Rachel, I think your mic is still muted right now.
I muted it because I didn't want to jump in and announce that I'm late to everyone, and I'm late to everyone. So
that's all right. Everyone can see you now and laugh. I'm kidding. Welcome, Rachel. Rachel is in our Praxian group as well, and so wanted to give a big warm welcome to her. And I think this is her first time on the Praxian Roundtable, or post-lib as we called it last time. And we're staying away from that term now.
It's a moment, not a movement.
We're just gonna keep adding. We're gonna keep adding hyphens.
It's like the LGBTQ thing.
Yeah, exactly.
When I first heard the term post-libertarianism, I said, and it's completely right, that you're going to have the same issues with postmodernism in many respects. And part of that has to do with naming. So that's why I say it's a moment. It's not a movement. It's when you realize that the ideas that you've been thinking of, as we've kind of been delineating here in this conversation, aren't up to snuff. And it's just in it. And I think one thing that's become clear, certainly, I think in your rhetoric and other people, is the degree to which this isn't. I think this is more like a software update than it is throwing out and getting rid of the computer. And I bring up the point of generational differences to try and illustrate this. right? Where you now you still have people of Murray Rothbard's generation operating and working and writing and coming up with ideas. There's a degree to which the brain becomes set and patterns become set over time. And this is, you might say, the chaos that then brings order. It's a wave. I would argue, we can quibble on that if you want, but like the degree to which the young are supposed to affirm the old, in a sense, right? And that starts with questioning, but it ends hopefully with better ideas.
Usually, yeah.
I think
Marketplace. Go ahead.
I think it's the implementation of a value system if you're not into that whole brevity thing.
Say that one more time. You're not into the whole brevity thing?
She was being brevity.
No. It was a Big Lebowski thing.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen that movie.
Andrew, I have a question. I was going to ask the obvious thing with the MisesGOP. How will you explain it to the libertarians who have this kind of cringe when they hear GOP? But let me ask you this. How will you explain it to the GOP people that say, what's this Mises thing about?
It's a tax cut sign here.
Okay, fair enough.
I kind of take the the idea, okay, with the anti-tax, because I would like to call it a Misesian anti-tax, because I feel like, okay, you have this archotropism problem of this thing isn't going away. What do you do about it? And there are several things you can do, and you can see for each of the 6 laws, there are different opportunities and drawbacks, and based on their incentives of what you could do or not, or what you should not do. And what like again, we talked about like Desantis, that hey, you need a with Desantis, okay, he's doing the right thing. Abbott is doing the right thing because you move towards order first in order to kill the demand for statecraft. Once the demand is killed, that way at that point you can start moving down towards spontaneous order, which is what we call liberty. And but the other thing we can do is actually engineer a system that will try to rapidly restore order in a better way, and will change the current incentives of the state from a less preferable to a more preferable sort of feedback loop. And because most of these things, this is another thing you notice with particularly with archotropism, but also with the free markets, that everything is a feedback loop. Mm-hmm. And it's really, really obvious with the free market, based on supply and demand and all that, because those are different feedbacks, and the price system will will moderate that and try to balance that out, particularly across time. You see the same thing with the state too, where I won't get into that. That's another rabbit hole. I shouldn't go there, but. But what I want to do with this anti-tax is, and particularly going to the GOP guys, is say, hey, this is a better way of funding your local government. Yes, it can also work for like your state and federal level too. And but let's focus on the local level first. Let's focus on getting it implemented and running here. And you always want to start small. You don't want to go you don't want to go big for for something new, because you don't know how it's actually going to work, or if there might be an unintended consequence you didn't think of. And so you want to find that out. You want to debug the situation on a patch server, basically. And then, once you've, done your patch testing and all that, at that point, you roll it out to the rest of your test bed or something like that. And so, we start small, and we're going to try this new system right here. There's a few other municipalities by us who want to try it with us. And so we're not doing this by ourselves, and we're going to have a whole bunch of smart and responsible people looking after this thing. And it's a tax cut. Sign here. Do you want your taxes to go down or up? And it's like, okay, they're going to say down, obviously. And I think that's a really simple way to just go with it. I don't have to explain the archotropism to them. Mm-hmm. I just have to explain to them, here's the incentive. Do you want your taxes lower or higher? And I'm sure this will be a really easy question for them to answer. It's like, oh, sure, if this could possibly lower our taxes, let's sign here. And particularly if you don't have to raise any taxes for it, because let's face it, the money has already been taken from you. You might as well put it towards something good that will benefit the Republican taxpayers who really do believe in lower and lower taxes. This is something that actually facilitates that and makes raising government revenue easier, while at the same time, it makes it less burdensome on the taxpayers. So this is something that I think they would actually, both sides, would actually agree on, because again, there's always that tug of war between the taxpayers and the tax raisers, and and I think this actually solves that tension. So this is actually something that, if you look at the incentives of archotropism, they might not, both sides are going to prefer it, and that this is actually just a better way of doing it. And maybe we shouldn't be trying. I would accept a counter argument that we should not be trying to make the state more efficient. And then I think that's a valid argument that some people have raised with me, and I usually respond, well, we should definitely try to make it less burdensome for the people, though. It's like I can't morally justify, because what you would effectively be justifying then is worse and more aggression against the people in order to make them try to, some vague idea that they're going to rise up and try to overthrow their government or something like that. That's just nonsense. That's fairy tale la la land. And I think it'd be a lot better for everybody, particularly for GOP guys, who are like, they are minarchists, they are not anarchist at all. And I think, we should be playing to the crowd that we have, not the one we wish we had. It'd be nice if everyone was an ANCAP already. But I think calling it a Misesian anti-tax will be like, well, what's a Misesian? And it's like, well, I'd love to have them ask that question. It'd be a good problem to have. And we don't have that problem right now. And in a world of problems, some problems are preferable to have. And this is a way that I can, say I can, basically pay them to almost, kind of like what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin, the genius of Bitcoin was it basically paid people to educate themselves on monetary policy. It gave them basically it's a payment system to pay people to educate themselves on, good monetary policy, and to educate others, because the more they educate others on how shitty the Fed is, the more other people are going to buy Bitcoin. So it's a perfect incentive-based system of liberty. And I want to do the same thing with the anti-tax, where we're going, okay, we're going to start educating people on budgetary fiscal policy this way. And I think this is a much better way of doing that actually will work out for the state and for the people. And it will be particularly attractive to the right. The left will probably try to do some dumb things with it, and I will absolutely hang them at the ballot box for that. And I can't wait for them to try to subvert this thing and do it precisely in the wrong way. That would not be they'll think it's to their benefit, and it will not be. I'm not going to tell them what that is, though. So spoiler, no spoilers.
What about the libertarians who have an allergy to the term GOP? Is it just watch how we do and you'll figure it out and you'll want to join us at some point? Or do you have a whole speech worked out to say, doesn't mean I agree with every GOP politician on the planet, but what's your
answer? I would say, hey, I stole your name. If you want to steal my idea, by all means. And, it's like this idea is there's nothing particularly objectionable about the anti-tax, which is why I started this MisesGOP, to basically pay people to, again, if you want a behavior out of someone, pay them to do it. And it's a universal behavioral hack for humans. If you want to hack the human machine, pay them to do what you want them to do. Everyone has a price. Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, that's part of, maybe you've covered this, and this is my fault for being late, but that's part of the idea behind Bitcoin as well, is that you can change incentives, right? We have the funny money fiat system right here. Part of the reason that all the military and police are enforcing things is because they're getting paid to do so, right? Because of that monopoly on the financial system and the resources, right? Like you say, a lot of the time is that people behave their incentives.
Yes,
and I know, by the way, I know that Bitcoin is not a silver bullet. I never had that impression. I don't think it can resolve the human condition, but it can certainly limit the power of the state, really put the power back into the hands of the people, and support small businesses and be a workaround to a lot of things. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's always anonymous or that, it can't ever be tracked or whatever. But I certainly would love a Bitcoin standard system, because again, the whole lifeblood of everything going on with all the COVID policies and everything supporting it is that funny money.
Yeah. And I think that, what I would say to the libertarians who are upset that I stole their name, although they don't believe in intellectual property. How that works, I don't know. But if they want to take this idea and start installing it in places, I mean, basically the only thing that really holds them back is that they don't have the ability to lobby your state level governments for the necessary regulations that's going to make it substantially more difficult for the left to subvert it in idiotic ways. Or at least counterproductive ways. The problem with calling the left idiots is that their idiocy is so ingenious.
Yeah, no shit.
They're completely ingenious in the way they subvert things, and so that's going to be a problem that the LP just simply cannot solve. Is that they cannot lobby the state level because they're the LP, and and again, the LP Mises caucus is going to have that same exact problem where they're able to do the installations, but they're not able to actually help protect it fully. But hey, if they want to help make some other Mises anti-taxes to install and help educate people on good free market policy and stuff like that, this would be the way I would just pay people to learn about it. As I would love to have them asking the question, what is a Misesian, and what is an anti-tax, and maybe are there better ways for us to fund our government that doesn't require me to pay taxes? That's what I just did, is I'm basically paying them in the form of a tax cut. And that's that's my pretty easy way to get them to just pay attention to what I want them to pay attention to. Just pay them, make it in their financial incentive. And so that that would be how I would respond to the Mises caucus. Okay, so just steal my idea. My idea is basically to pay people to educate themselves.
So, Andrew, do people want to fight you? The question I would ask them is, has there anything that the Libertarian, and it doesn't have to be Libertarian Party, has there been anything liberty-wise that has prevented the whole COVID policy, globalization thing from happening?
Can you ask that question one more time for me, please?
Oh, yeah. Well, two things. So, to any liberty people fighting you on your stance and your proposal, I would say, has there been anything from, and it doesn't have to be just the Libertarian Party, that doesn't have to have a monopoly on all freedom, obviously, but has there been anything that's prevented all this global tyranny happening and accelerating the way that it did? I'd say no. Did the Ron Paul movement stop it? No.
No. But and I think this is a good point, that just simply educating people isn't enough. You actually have to give them a real praxis. I know, like, basically, this is something Jason Stapleton always points out. You need to have a call to action.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the actual action? And at this point, I think Jose Gallison is in the chat. He's mentioned Konkin and Hoppe, who have both actually proposed real praxes, or Praxis is, I guess, that of what to do about it. These are actual calls to action. Mm-hmm. And I just think the LP, because the LP, their call to action is just continue educating people. And, I don't think that quite cuts it. But, and particularly, we had quite a lot of education with Ron Paul. And I would say for right now, we actually have more than enough libertarians to get what we want done. So if you look at just how many votes the LP gets, if you translated that into mayors or city councils, we control all of them. Like literally all of them. You could, because there's like 20,000 in the United States, and you could control literally all of them with the amount of libertarians we have right now. We just need, we just really need to organize them and channel them into either local politics or maybe agorism or wealth, power, and influence or whatever. And you have to, but I don't actually think we need more of them. But it'd be nice to have, of course. But yeah, it'd be nice to have. I just don't think it's necessary at this point.
Need more educators? Was that the point, or education outlets?
Well, basically,
I was also reading the chat, so I kind of lost you towards the end there. Sorry.
I would say what we need is to take the amount of libertarians we have right now and actually translate them either into the political system to take over city councils and town councils and mayorships and.
Well, and when I talk, as I've when I was talking with the guys with the LPMC in my state, and we were going over strategy and things of that nature. That's actually what a lot of people are interested in doing. I think one thing that's gotten me more bearish on the Libertarian Party being the vehicle, which is really all it is. I do think that there is a there is something here in this little mostly online community of libertarians and whatever else we might call ourselves, as the case may be. But the bearishness of the LP again comes down to the infrastructure at the end of the day, and it's also all the work that's going to go into all the work that's involved at the moment trying to take over this political party that is actively rejecting the efforts, actively pushing against it, expelling members, actively banning people for jokes made online, so on and so forth. All the activity and effort going into overthrowing the current leadership in a political party that doesn't hold power for what will ultimately, in most cases, be a nonpartisan race to create the most impact.
Yep. That's what I keep thinking when they say we're focusing on local stuff. It's like, I don't need you. I mean, not the specific people. I don't need an LP at a local level. And I won't say his name, but someone that we all know who he is, who's well known in our circles, said the vehicle of the LP is an old, junked out, beat down RV, and these people are trying to drive it across the country thinking it's going to make it. You said you were LB. You said you were reading the comments. I was too. The Free State Project I hear about a lot. I honestly don't know much about it, but someone said, where was it here? Michael Revelle said only Liberty successes have been in New Hampshire with the Free State Project, but wasn't New Hampshire locked down? And Florida was not.
Has New Hampshire banned vaccine passports?
Nope.
Right. So I would say that there's bigger Liberty successes in Texas and Florida. Again, I don't know a lot about New Hampshire, but
I could be wrong too. Yeah.
I think they had lockdowns and mask mandates.
They did. And again, the reason for that is you need to, go for order first. And so if you elect a guy like Desantis, whose natural instincts are towards order, that's going to be, provide you more liberty on the end, on the back end, because again, you can't get to liberty by pursuing it. You actually have to pursue something else that leads to it. And that's, what, Jose is actually talking about in the chat too, that actually you need to, actually make these incentives work for people, because it's the incentives that lead you in the proper direction. And rather than you can't just take ideology there. It just doesn't work. And I think that's going to be an issue for your, LP types, but that, that it's like that, they have no like way of, let me actually put it like this way. If I wanted to steel man the argument for the LP, I would, dispense with the national issue. It's like, I feel like that's a red herring. I feel like that, I'm not sure why they chose this. We're going to have a big, loud national campaign. It's going to, I'm very black pilled on that. And if I wanted to steel man the argument for that, I would say, hey, we're in the LP because it's easier to maneuver when it's just us libertarians. When it's only us, we don't have to deal with, any, conservatives or anything like that. And, it's easier for us to get together and work together, when it's just libertarians who are all, much more like-minded than, we would be in a big tent party like the Republican Party is, because again, there's multiple ideologies within the Republican Party. And and I would steel man the LP argument. Well, at this point, it's just us. We don't have to have that extra debate with the populists. We don't have to fight the neocons. We don't have to fight the constitutional conservatives, and corral these people and maybe compromise our positions or whatever. We can just be ourselves and work together as ourselves. And I would say, okay, at the same point, you're still having a substantially smaller party to work with then. And again, at a local level, you don't need a party. And it's nice, and even if you don't need one, it's still nice to have one, but it's still not, but it's even nicer to have a bigger one. And, and again, you still have, if you're, for my strategy with the anti-tax, you're going to need some ability to lobby your state legislature. And you don't have to get people elected to it. That might help, but you don't have to. But you still do need that ability to lobby. And the Libertarian Party just does not have that for me. So for my purposes, trying to get these anti-taxes, like 19,500 of them installed, I'm going to need a bigger party. Yeah, I'm going to need the GOP. I can't do that. I can't do all that I need to do with the LP.
So Andrew, let's talk about, why those incentives matter. And people, if you build it, they will come. People go towards where they benefit. That's how it works. And I'll give you an example. I know tons of New Yorkers that will go on and on about how people aren't wearing masks. They're not doing this and this, blah, 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 blah. They go to Florida. They go to Texas. Why do you think that is, right? They'll say one thing, but in terms of actions, in terms of actual output that people are doing, they're moving towards the states where the passports and stuff are getting banned. I'm sorry. They're going towards where the economy is.
That's exactly
it. You just prove it right there. Yeah.
And and you can think of this as like a Darwinian evolutionary behavior that it's like what we call natural selection. Who got selected? The people who the organisms or the life that really behaved. Its incentives when they changed. They're the ones. You can think of my incentives are to eat, reproduce, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what are the things that really help with that? As a human. Having money, getting a regular paycheck and all that stuff, those are things that really help you do that. And so when you're this is why humans are so highly evolved to behave their incentives subconsciously. That way they don't even have to think about it. Because if you have to think first before you behave your ideology, that's a hesitation, that's a delay. That might be the difference between life and death. Well, you need to, and so you actually are highly, this is why most people are not ideological thinkers. Like a good 75% of the human population are just not ideological at all. So
this is why, like, people, look, I understand some people are getting coerced and they're vaccinating, all this stuff. When people say, I did it for my family, if you ask a cop, why are you doing the job you're doing? I got to feed my family. Everyone's going to tell you, I got to feed my family. They're going to go where they can feed their family.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it.
The state knows that, right? Most of the policies surrounding, that the state uses, if it's child support, if it's courts, or it's whatever, they like to leverage the things that people love against them in a negative way. And here you're offering positive incentives and saying, I will reward you if you behave in this good way, right?
Yeah. It's a perverse incentive, sure, but it's still an incentive, and people will do it for this reason. This is one of the key lessons of archotropism, is that it's all about incentives. And this is actually something that Mises 100% agreed with, and I think Rothbard did to a lesser extent. He still agreed with it, but to a lesser extent, that these incentives matter. Because Mises was like straight up, it's like people are voting for war because it's profitable to them, and so long as that's. And you can't just like morally condemn it, and actually change anything. Moral condemnation does not change a thing. And he phrased it as academic valuations, are basically irrelevant to the incentive. And this is that's what this thing is. It's all about incentives. And people. And then he had another thing where he would always talk about like your stated preference versus your revealed preference. And people say they want, X, Y, and Z, but actually it's what they end up doing is substantially different. And, that shows you the real preference of what's actually real. And
like I said, blue people moving to those red states.
Mm-hmm. And, it's like libertarians say that there's no difference between left and right, and yet so many of them seem to be moving to Texas and Florida out of like shitholes like California, New York, and Illinois. No offense, LB, but
none taken.
We'd love to have you.
I'd be lying if I said that even just like the reason why I'm on this stream and not drinking right now with people that, including some people that I care a lot about, is because I was asked to get a test before I went for a weekend.
Oh, that's right.
That sucks. Yeah, you mentioned that. That sucks, buddy.
So we had like a very civil conversation, and I don't hate the person who's who we were going to celebrate this weekend. And he points out that he's in between a rock and a hard place on it. And it basically came down to being, I was thinking about the difference between being a believer and being a man of God. or a woman of God, as the case may be. And a lot of people are believers, but not or a man of principle or a person of principle. And because it was expressed to me like, sometimes there are more things more important than your principles. And to the specific instance, it really came down to, I have an at-home test sitting over there. I could take it 10 minutes, no problem. The joke is I'm not going to give people the pleasure of my company if they require a test beforehand. But these things are changing faster than people are recognizing. And to a certain extent, those of us who are trying to interpret what's happening right now, like trying to navigate the gravitational pull of ideas, as the case may be, I think you can be a little far ahead of the curve, and so the people behind you don't really see it as well. For example, I was listening to someone like Matt on King Pilled being like, all right, like he's decent, he's got some nice things, sort of decent hair, it's okay. I hope he's still listening. But like some things are going wrong, and some of it was stuff that I had to go and see for myself, especially as it related to like, basically the infrastructure of the LP as it existed. Because I was completely sold on the idea of building up my own wealth. I mean, this is Jordan Peterson. This is the call to adventure that everybody has to have and everybody has to answer. And you should be wary of people who don't answer that call.
You wanted to say something, Rachel?
Yes, sorry.
No, it's okay. I've said this multiple times, which is like the problem with the libertarian philosophy is it makes you a pacifist at best and a hypocrite at worst, which is basically it just forces people into a defensive position just because the terms and conditions of the game are so monopolized.
Well, what
by
it
the
is
state,
that
right?
You're adapting in your head. This is what Pete talks about when you're living in a Kapistan in your head. Is
you're
that
trying to have a free market response to a not a free market problem.
Well, it's actually even more fundamental than that. But you're correct, absolutely. But what it is you're adapting to a world that doesn't exist. That's a maladaptation. You're behaving the incentives of a world that does not exist, and those are not real incentives. And the actual real incentive is substantially less libertarian. And you need to actually behave the real incentives in order to be adaptive to, and this is the problem with a lot of all ideology, not just libertarianism, is that, it makes you adapt to a world that just does not exist. It's a maladaptation. And again, that we're highly evolved to do the opposite, to not even think about it, to behave without even think about it.
Yeah, because there's two main debates that I've said before when it comes to liberty is why is liberty important, and also what to do with said liberty. And there's a lot of libertarians, I don't agree with the second part of what to do with said liberty, because what they want to do with that liberty is not sustainable, has a lot of unforeseen consequences, and is going to hurt everybody, right? Even if, so it's like, yeah, so it's like I want to be around like-minded people who share the same values as I do and be a part of an intentional community and have something to move towards rather just than the abstract concept. I want my autonomy, but autonomy for what and to why and for what purpose, right? If you don't have that larger purpose other than just simply fighting the state, you're always in this constant defense. And that's, like I said before, is, for libertarians who want to argue that there's nothing wrong with the vaccine passports if they're enforced by a private business, okay, but that's within the context and the backdrop of the state actively destroying small businesses and alternatives. Yeah. Like, they forget the bigger picture. They forget, like, all of these moving parts happening. It's like they judge every incident sort of individually, and they forget that, like, this is happening while this shift is occurring. And you don't have to be psychic to know where things are going. I mean, the World Economic Forum has written a white paper called Build Back Broader, and they talk about changing government structures. They want to have a less bureaucratic model and change it to these socially responsible corporations that take over. And they want to have a global tax, and they want to have a global employee database that one could access. And they put their manifesto out there for everyone to read. It's not a conspiracy, right? That's what they're doing, and that's where we're headed, is that technocratic social credit system. So to me, look, I think agorism is important. To me, it's important to do no matter what, because at this point, being functional and healthy is just rebellion in of itself, right? Like, you're going to have to go against the grain of the system as it currently stands to really take care of yourself and your family and get anywhere. So that's just to say, look, the libertarians that don't agree with you, that they can, if they want to invest in Bitcoin, right? If they want to have that agri route, like you said, if they want to build small businesses and alternatives, that works in tandem with the things that you're saying. They can still go do those things. I mean, there's nothing stopping them from trying to do those things, right?
Yeah, and again, I mentioned this a little earlier. I tweeted this out last night because Scott Horton was on Pete's show, and they were talking about are these strategies mutually exclusive? And Scott said no, and I agreed with him like publicly that no, these are actually not mutually exclusive. At least not entirely. And I actually pointed out that. You might not intend it this way, but there's actually at this point, there's nothing stopping Dave from running in the GOP primary and then switching over to the LP general. Because I mean, his plan right now is just for the LP general, and they're basically the only rules stopping him from doing a GOP run first in the primary, and then when he loses, moving over to the the LP. The only rules stopping him from that are the LP nomination rules. Those are the only ones. And Mises Caucus has the full power to change all of that. And, so if he wants to, do both, those are not actually mutually exclusive. And, the only thing that's really stopping them is just like emotion. And I'm not going to be sympathetic to that in 2021.
Yeah.
Emotion, but also taste.
Well, and to me,
there's some, and I'm saying that, like, personally speaking too, you can go back to a podcast I did right after the election with a good friend of mine who, him and I have been talking ideas for as long as we've known each other. And he had even asked me at the time, because at the moment I was like, I think things are changing. And I think the question of political involvement is different now than it was 5 years ago or even 2 years ago. And so, and he's like, okay, so what do you think? I'm like, I don't know, maybe joining with the Libertarian Party. It's like, well, why not the GOP? You'd have more success, you'd have an easier chance of success. You'd have a bigger chance for a broader impact. And I said very clearly on the show, and it was definitely a large part of it, was like, well, but this other organization bears my name. It bears a lot of the, again, I talk a lot about identity in my show and what I do at beenawake.com, and kind of like trying to explore this idea philosophically. But to the specific, so like, my identity has been tied up with the word libertarian for a long time, right? And yet I've been interviewing people since like January. Jose is one of them. Shout out Jose. But like every single time that you talk to somebody, it's like, well, I'm a libertarian, kind of, James Gentleman, I'm a libertarian-ish in the episode, or like, I call myself a voluntarist because that way because of the word libertarian, people don't get it. Or they think it means something that I'm not. So there's this issue within, the identity. And we can get into my conception of identity being some kind of a paradox, but the point is, I think it's just a matter of taste. And there's something to be said for the fact of this libertarian thing has gotten far more concerned with the in-group than it was 10 years ago when I started researching and learning about Austrian economics and free markets. It's become because if in no small part because there's more people, right? But it's become far more concerned with the in-group with the in-group preference, and less concerned with trying to bring people into the fold, as the case may be.
Well, you're dealing with, these are still human beings, and they're not exempt from human being behavior. And I think that's the thing that libertarians tend to forget, is they think that they can rationally, logic their way to their conclusions. But they kind of, it's like, well, they understand a lot of incentives. They forget like all of these aspects that happen. People tend to be tribalistic. They tend to have in-group preference. It doesn't matter what the group, you could have an anti-group, right? People tend to turn things into a religion. Even with Bitcoin, people treat Bitcoin like a religion. This is what they do. I mean, and it's like the only way to sort of work with that is to be consciously aware of it and kind of try to incorporate or integrate it in some way to your own benefit. But that's, that's asking too much.
Well, that's another thing is, again, hierarchy is one of those incentives because it makes everything more efficient. So that's where you get tribes from. But with this thing that's like, hey, there is nothing, it's a matter of taste. But if you were saying that your mission is to actually, if you're saying your mission is to spread the message as much as possible, then you'd want to get in front of the most people possible, or at least have a message that an audience that is densely packed with people who are going to be naturally receptive to that message. And by only going to the general audience of the general electorate, which is a lot of which is really, really not densely packed with people who are just going to absolutely love liberty. It's like, and again, you would want to go to like the Republican primary, which is where Ron Paul went, and and ideally you would do both, but again, ideally you would want to do both, but and then have your message everywhere. But it seems like they're actually going to be behaving their in-group incentives instead of the actual out-group incentives, because they think those incentives are evil. It's like I have no explanation for why you would say these people, I want to go to the general election audience, which is substantially more hostile to liberty than the Republican audience, because I think the Republicans are evil because they started a war 2 decades ago or something like that. And I don't know what their explanation for that would be, but they have like some tastes or something like that. Maybe go, well, I like the word libertarian next to my name, and I'm sorry, that doesn't do it for me. That's just a very superficial thing that I can't relate to that. And I have very little sympathy for people letting their emotions cloud their proper judgment. Well, and which you really should be making the more calculated decision that's going to maximize value. Is calculations that make the world move forward. This is the engineering mindset. And if you're kind of just feeling your way through reality, I feel like you're going to make quite a few bad decisions, and you're going to behave malincentives. One of which is that I feel like this in-group incentive of the LP. Again, I'm happy to work with the LP because I understand that that's my incentive, but they're not happy to work with me because that's not their incentive. They have an in-group incentive that's overpowering their spread liberty incentive.
So 2 things. One, people like to play games that they can win, right? Overall, right? Yeah. And whoever controls the terms and conditions of the game is in a really good power position. And then number 2, the past 18 months to me have been one big ad for liberty. And I like to say autonomy, by the way, because it's a little bit easier for people to understand. It's a little like less abstract or whatever, in the context, say, hey, I need my freedom to be able to make personal choices in my life to direct the flow of that to protect me and the people I care about. When you say it that way, it's a little bit, it hits home a bit more with people instead of saying like, I don't understand what you mean by the, so to me, if I were in the Libertarian Party or whatever, if I was a donor in something and they came and said, hey, what we're going to do to fight tyranny is give us money and we'll put an ad about why freedom's important. I'd be like, are you out of your mind? Like, where's your sense of urgency? Where's your sense of shit is hitting the fan? Like, is this really how you want to tell people like it's not enough to be anti-racist? You have to be like, what are we doing here? They're basically following the leftism all the same, right? If their values aren't rooted in a sort of right ideology, they're just drifting left, just maybe at a slower speed, but that's where they're headed.
Yeah. If you have a strong foundation, right? If you have a strong foundation on a house, it's going to stand the test of time.
But they don't.
There is a huge degree, and this is inevitable with any movement as it becomes more popular. Is that as something becomes more popular, there's more people, fewer of them are going to have a strong foundation. Like, for example, the idea that there could be a libertarian who wanted progressive ends was anathema to me. I couldn't quite understand the frame. I don't understand how you would let those things cohere. And yet I can find people who will make the case for exactly that, and saying that that progressive ends are actually progressive in a technical sense too, by the way. I mean that, when I speak of ideas, I mean them in the technical sense, not necessarily the idea of like, well, let's have progress, right? That's lowbrow thinking. That's not what I'm referring. Yeah. The like progressive ends, the idea that progressive government is the way to go. and yet that's the case, and that shows again the inevitable drift that can kind of happen if you don't have a strong foundation to ideas, and if the and again because you really only find these people in the LP. And yes, I'm so glad you highlighted this comment from Joshua, who's been killing it in the chat, especially his comments about just blue collar guys not being interested in philosophical investigations. And I certainly come from an academic background, and I have a very academic way of speaking, and I've worked on making that simpler and easier to understand, precisely because I now work every day with blue collar people who's like, yeah, dude, I don't care. Like, I just want to feed my kids and make sure that things are good. And there's so much more in that. I love the academic discussion, but I don't pretend it's for everybody.
Yeah, and like for these blue collar guys, this is like 80% of the public. This is like 75-80% of the public is this sort of person, human being who is just not interested in ideology, because again, this is ideology tends to be maladaptive. It's not adaptive to the incentives of the actual world, and people prefer to not have to think about their incentives. They just want to do, and that's the sort of thing that actually is adaptive to reality. That's the sort of thing that makes you survive natural selection. That's why incentive-based thinkers are the dominant majority by a lot, and ideological thinkers are they're a very pronounced minority. And what Joshua has kind of pointed out here is that I don't really want this to turn into a bash the LP. I don't want to just turn this into the bash the LP thing, because I don't think that's what you're not telling people what you're for. You're telling them what you're against. It's like, okay, we need a little bit more than that. So let's not turn this into a bash the LP thing. But I think what we're for is actually victory. We're actually for the incentives that lead us to adapting to this new reality. Because let's face it, the world's changed. We are not in pre-2016 anymore. 2016 changed everything. 2020 changed everything times 10. Exactly. And this is something that I feel like, okay, the anti-tax that for MisesGOP, this is what is going to help us be adaptive to the world as it is now. And because I really don't think there's any going back. The ruling class certainly doesn't want to go back. They like the control that they have. And I don't think we can just be taking our feelings anymore. And we don't have time. That's a luxury we don't have anymore. We're too poor in terms of liberty to really care about people's feelings and people's tastes. And I don't think we can be sympathetic to those sorts of reasons for why you would not follow the best incentives out there. Well, and the incentive right here is to again run for local office, to again donate to MisesGOP so we can help people run for good libertarians run for office, take power, help and start this installation process for these anti-taxes, and again to also help us lobby these state level governments to help us protect this new form of tax, not really taxation, but this new form of supplying revenue to the state that doesn't involve us having to pay annual taxes every year. This is something that that people will follow just based on their own incentives, because they understand this is good for them. And if we help people behave their incentives better, this is actually supplying the order to society that we really need to have. Because something that Yarvin talks about is that real order promotes further order. It does not promote chaos. Chaos promotes chaos, and order promotes order. So those are, and the apex of order is like Misesian order, where free market order. And so you can say, okay, well, this is like I guess like authoritarian chaos or something like that. Well, no, it's just chaos, because it only promotes chaos. Order always promotes order. It's no accident that this Enlightenment or whatever came after like 15-ish centuries, or like maybe like 1,000 centuries of Christian monarchies. Very right wing, very low time preference monarchies that created the amount of order you needed to eventually establish, an Enlightenment sort of thought, or a classical liberal thought. That would, basically they made a bad jump. They went down to the other, to the bottom left quadrant. They really should have gone to the bottom right, but they made a bad jump. But when they're trying to finally move down, remember, you always start over here. Basically authoritarian left, authoritarian chaos was where we started for basically all of human history. Christian monarchy kind of moved us to right wing kind of authoritarian order. And after authoritarian order, we got to like the more spontaneous liberty, the spontaneous order that we kind of had for a little while, but we ended up moving left and too far, and now left brought us right back up. But again, our incentives moving forward.
It's a current.
Yeah, our incentives moving forward, because now we're right back to left-wing authoritarianism, which is where we started 2,000-ish years ago, and 12,000, probably 12 or 200,000 years, 1,000 years ago, depending on how long you want to count. But we were at the left-wing authoritarianism for basically all of our existence, and we've finally come a full circle. So let's finally find these incentives to help us move back to where we were. And this is like I want to make a plug right now. Please donate to MisesGOP at MisesGOP.com/donate. We have a WinRed page now where you guys can all can donate to become monthly donors. Any little bit helps. If we can get to just a few thousand people, we can make this whole thing a reality. It's like if I had half the budget and half the people of the LP Mises Caucus, it would be game over. We would have everything we needed. All I need is that like a few thousand really, really committed people who want to run for office, and just like maybe a few $1,000s a month. That's all it's going to take in order to actually get the incentive, actually get this process started. Because once we get this ball rolling, it's going to snowball, and because that's the way incentives work. Once they're first realized, the first mover always has an advantage, and but people will quickly recognize, oh, this person has an advantage over me. I don't like that, so I'm going to have to start behaving the same incentive structure. And this way, we can get basically the people to do it for us. We get the ball. All we have to do is get the ball rolling, and they'll take it over from there. So you want to go, help us donate. We don't need much, so that point, every little bit really, really helps. And take it away, one of you.
I'd like to connect to something that I said at the beginning of the stream, that I think really comes into play, and we're kind of witnessing in real time, which is that the American right, in that it's existed throughout the entirety of the country, and the people, we're not talking about elites looking for power in this instance, have believed incorrectly that the Constitution was holding things together. Really, it was inertia holding things together for the last 50 or so years. And as we've pointed out, we've seen the drift leftward, and certainly it's become more pronounced. The people, what's happening? I just had a conversation this week. Union guy, right? Lifetime Union guy, huge Donald Trump supporter during 2016. He said, I put my faith in a man and he betrayed me. And he was talking about Donald Trump. And I certainly, if you had talked to me in 2017, I wouldn't have seen it. But it is the case that the American right is pushing, and part of the American right is the labor movement, which has been traditionally a Democrat, a union labor, which is traditionally Democrat. So this is unprecedented. The realignment that's actually occurring in terms of demographic has nothing to do with race, as you might imagine, because race is just a system of social control. That's all racism is. But they're realizing that, again, that the Constitution isn't actually protecting anything, so they have to protect it. I've been wondering why we haven't seen it occur yet, and I think part of the reason is nobody is there to lead the charge. Yep. And what I see as being ostensibly on the right, as libertarianism is, and having a strong foundation vis-a-vis Austrian economics, as the case may be, as being perfectly poised to leading it. So the question is, why not? And the answer to that is the same reason why you don't get out of bed in the morning and why you don't make your bed in the morning, right? Because somebody in your past, or in this case, the society, if we want to get all woo woo, is holding you back. You have that natural thing of saying, well, to put it in the archetropism framework, the idea that libertarianism is a zero-time preference for power. And why do you do that? Well, because I don't really want to take power because I don't want to make the wrong decision, or because I could potentially become corrupted. And these are all realities. But if you move through life, and as you move from like a child into an adult, right? But when you leave behind the things and ideas of childhood, and you think, and you know, the thoughts of a child, and you have the thoughts of a man instead, you realize you have to take on responsibility. You have to take on power. You have to take on authority for yourself, or at least some of us do. And there are plenty of people out there listening, and plenty of people who are in the Mises caucus that's operating within the Libertarian Party who have that same sentiment.
Yeah,
and
again, I don't want to turn this into a bash the LP.
No, I don't think I was doing that.
Yeah. But yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not going to do that. Just to make sure. Sorry, I thought that was where you were about to go. I didn't mean, but
go where? Oh, you mean like that we're going to make bad decisions? Or no, I
was speaking that we were going to start bashing the LP again. I was like,
no, I'm saying like that they all want that, and again, it's answering the call to adventure, right? There's plenty of danger within it. But again, but if you're gonna say we need to try and you want to achieve freedom, the question remains: how do you go about finding that?
I agree. Go ahead.
I was gonna say we have a situation right now where the Supreme Court and the courts are essentially corrupt, right? So what do you do when you're arguing for the Constitution within a system that is kind of just doing whatever it wants?
Yeah, I mean
right?
The best thing that the Constitution did was it, separated out states from federal, and because that is actually a real incentive system that can sustain itself. This division of actual division of powers is the 50 states versus the federal government, or the 50 states having a war over the federal government. Like, that's actually real separation of power. That that was one of the best things the Constitution did, and dividing it and. There was whereas like the amendments and stuff of what your Bill of Rights are and stuff like that, that's not really anything. That's not much. And I think people are starting to realize that, incentives actually really matter, and you can't just like write something into law and expect it to be enforced. That's a very simpleton mindset, that I can just make a law and people will follow it because it's the law. And it's like, no, reality is substantially more complex than that. People will do their incentives regardless of law most of the time.
So for instance, there's incentives for the left to use crisis actors to run false flags and hoaxes and various conspiracies as a war tactic. They do this, right? And we can prove that they do this.
Works.
So it's like they don't wait around for an election. If they don't agree, they could just have a riot or something and pay people to show up to the riot and start fighting on their behalf. Or they can have a bail fund, get together and bail out people that end up in jail so that they can go do it again. So when you're dealing with
incentivizing criminals and mentally unstable people, as we saw time and time again.
We can't avoid that kind of infrastructure, right? So it's like, I'm happy that people are, I don't know, like suing federal or suing the governors or everyone's suing everybody. Cool, but like, I don't know where things are going to go in terms of just simply using the courts.
And I think
that's why DeSantis did the right thing.
Yeah, and I think that, like with Abbott, I think people have kind of woken up to the idea that, it's actually not even enough. Not only is it not enough to just vote for the right person, but you actually need to really hold them accountable while they're in office. And that's very difficult to do. But they're seeing stuff, because I look at my normie conservatives I usually follow, and they're like being like with Abbott, like banning vaccine mandates. They're like, okay, well, now we actually have to start upholding this, and we can't just like expect him to, he signed a piece of paper, and well, where's the actual enforcement of it? And people have started to understand that, that these incentives actually they aren't what they thought they were. And now they're trying to figure out, how do we adapt to this new system? And I really think this Mises GOP strategy of, well, actually, it really helps to, because power controls power is the only thing that can hope to control power. So, if we have a whole bunch of, really hardcore mayors who are right there, kind of with their bayonets, right behind Abbott, that's going to help his linguini spine a little bit more. And because it's like if incentivizing him with election doesn't work, disincentivizing him with, hey, your mayor, all of your Republican mayors are going to be in like open revolt if you screw this up, and actually we're going to actually be starting to get out ahead of you, which is going to publicly embarrass you. perhaps you shouldn't. Perhaps you should, behave your incentives a little bit better, and you're basically prodding him to do better. And I think this is the sort, and you mentioned earlier, like the right is kind of looking for leadership right now. I think we're well poised to start taking this, and actually provide them that leadership they're looking for right now, and because this is what they're asking for.
Well, and that give it substance, and to move away from this conservative incorporated, which is just this corporate controlled drone that probably all of us here, to a greater or lesser extent, grew up in, right? This corporatized machine that kind of creates good Republicans, good Democrats, and, as the case may be, good libertarians. And by good, I mean beneficial to, I mean not challenging the regime.
Yeah.
In this instance,
it's a logjam of same old. And if something doesn't work, you have to throw it out and do something different. I mean, we criticize progressives so much for saying, don't you understand that what you're doing, you advocate for one thing, but the outcome of your policy is another. You have to apply that to other things as well. You have to apply that to libertarianism. Is the outcome you're getting in line with the things that you want to see? What they want is, they want a free world. They want that last, outcome or whatever, but they don't know what to do to reach that point.
Yeah, they need leadership because that's what makes this system efficient. Hierarchy is an efficiency behavior. And I think this is what this is our incentive to provide to them. And I think we are getting about ready to wind up, although I think we're just about to get Buck back now. But
that's funny.
Anyway, oh no, this is Mark Metz, but never mind. Never mind. But
definitely end the stream now. End the stream now.
Yeah, I was about to end this anyway. Sorry about that, Muck. Muck or Bud. Sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name now because you're both now. Sorry, Mark. But all right. Well, hey, it's been a good stream for the Libertarian Roundtable, and I am Popular Liberty. Guys, do your plugs.
Rachel.
Okay, you can find me Rachel D. Tobias, and by the way, I am the only Office of Existential Management. I don't know why nobody has figured out to compete with me on that. Because I think that's not necessary. So you can mostly, again, find me on Twitter.
LB?
I am the mind behind the Been Awake Project for Better Sense Making. You can go to beenawake.com. Please subscribe with your email, where I talk about news, mindset, and philosophy. And I try to make it consumable, entertaining, and frankly, something you can read while you're on the toilet in the morning. Because that's a captive audience if there ever was one. But you can find me on Twitter at @TheLBMuñiz. And what I would say in closing is stop watching the performance, start seeing the production, and become the free.
Yep. I am at Popular Liberty on Twitter. You can find me, of course, right here at Popular Liberty on YouTube. And if you would please, donate at MisesGOP.com/donate to help us spread the anti-tax and help us, as Vigenti Tres says here, help us start manipulating procedural outcomes, to liberty's advantage. Please donate to help us get people elected so we can do just that. And again, the first person we're going to be trying to elect is Buck Johnson, and that's it. He's going to be at the top. So going to vote for Fireman Buck to keep the dumpster fire of Austin contained. So at least keep it from spreading to Lockhart. So, all right. Well, hey, it's been a good stream. Thank you guys.
Ciao.
Thank you, Praxians. Bye-bye.
Bye.